All right. Good morning, afternoon, whatever the case may be. We are going to introduce our next section of ethics, which is the medieval world. Okay. Now, if you recall from our last section, the ancient world, we said that the year 476 was an important year, 476 AD. If you recall, that was the fall of Rome. Now, Rome and the Roman Empire, which came to occupy pretty much all of Western Europe, North Africa, and much of the Middle East, had a tremendous influence on Europe. And so the medieval world is still very much influenced by the shadow of the Roman Empire. Were we to look at a map, you know what? I'm going to draw a quick little map. Hang on. Bear with me. It's going to be kind of not good, but at least we'll get a perspective here. Okay, there's like Norway and stuff. All right. Bad map of Europe. So the Roman Empire occupied, okay, so this is right here, Spain and France, Germany up to approximately here, obviously Italy, that's Italy. It owned Greece. And the Middle East as far as through the Holy Lands, but they didn't get too far into what's now called Iraq and Persia and that kind of stuff. Egypt, as well as what was called Africa. Africa for these guys was pretty much this area here, which was known in the ancient world as Carthage. Pretty much nobody understood sub-Saharan Africa. So Africa was Carthage and Egypt. So this was the Roman Empire, slightly before this time of 476. When Rome conquered all these places, so in the centuries previous, Rome, under both the Republic and the emperors, moved out from, this is the city of Rome approximately here, moved out and spread their empire all over the place, and they would send out their army in legions, and they would send out governors to what was called the provinces. All right, the word province means pro, for, Winkia, which means conquering. And so first the army goes, then they become province status, and when they have a province, then they have a governor. And so there was a governor in these provinces. And the provinces were things like Gaul, Cisalpine Gaul, Germania, Hispania, etc., etc. In fact, most of the names today for these capital cities in these countries came from their Roman names. But anyways, in 476, well, you could say really from about 350 on, Rome started to become enmeshed in wars it couldn't win. And slowly but surely, peoples from the Middle East, what were called the Parthians in those days, basically Iraqis or Persians today, and peoples from Germany began to really give the Romans a hard time militarily. And so the empire begins to shrink. These attacks get worse. The economy suffers. To make a long story short, the empire essentially crumbles. Okay. By 476, Rome no longer has much control of any of this area anymore. However, there's an important thing that happens. In the year 331 AD, a guy by the name of Constantine becomes emperor. And Constantine does something unusual. He converts to Christianity. And when he converts to Christianity, first he makes it okay, acceptable for Christians to exist in the empire. Until that time, the Christians were quite persecuted. And so when he becomes Christian himself, he legitimizes the empire, the Christian community in the empire. Secondly, he takes on the role of the governor of the church, because at the time, shortly after the death of Christ, up until this time, I'm sorry, this was 313, not 331. 313 AD. The Christian church was very fragmented with all sorts of different accounts of Christ's life and different accounts of how we should interpret Scripture and all that, and even different accounts of Scripture itself. And so there are many competing Christian churches. So Constantine in 325 calls a council at the city of Nicaea. And what he says is, all right, all these competing Christian bishops need to come together and come up with an overarching system of belief, which then becomes the Nicene Creed. The point. The aftermath, essentially, of the Council of Nicaea is a universal church. And the word universal in Latin is Catholica, hence Catholic Church. There's an historical reason for this, folks. I'm not trying to throw religion on you in any way, shape, or form. So the point to be made here is that by the 3rd century AD, the Roman Empire had not only legions and governors, but also bishops, because when Constantine converts to Christianity in the ensuing decades, the Christian church ends up becoming the official church of the empire, which means that in addition to governance and military in the provinces, also Roman church bishops go out to these provinces. So, for our story, here's the point, and this is where the whole medieval thing comes in. The medieval period in history is one that is absolutely dominated by the Catholic Church. And the reason why it is dominated by the Catholic Church, this is the symbol for Christianity, is because when the Roman government falls apart, all the provincial governance and administrative apparatus fall apart. The armies either desert or go native. Everything falls apart, and the Roman presence officially disappears except for the church. And so within Europe, in the early medieval period, the only system of administration left in place is the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church, of course, as remnants of the Roman Empire, speaks Latin. And so you have these centers throughout Europe, these little bishoprics, which, while the Germans and Gauls and Celts, all these tribes go back to warring among themselves in the aftermath, the vacuum of the collapse of Rome, you have what's called the Dark Ages. And the Dark Ages are a time where all of these formerly occupied provinces erupt into violence, chaos, etc., vying for power, and the only thing left in terms of any economic or administrative stability is a Catholic Church. So the medieval period is heavily dominated by the apparatus of the Catholic Church, because on one level, the influence of Rome has been thrown off. But the strange thing is that people still sort of seek back and hearken back to a unified, consolidated, peaceful empire. Because under the Roman Empire, there was what was called the Pax Romana, wherein, because Rome was such a huge power, it maintained peace, more or less. Now, granted, if you were one of the peoples oppressed by the Romans, well, you wouldn't really call it Pax Romana. But the idea was that under the Roman occupation, life was okay, things were stable, the economy was good, and the people lived in relative peace. When Pax Romana is destroyed because of the collapse of the empire, and all the troops and administrators and anybody that could enforce the Pax Romana are gone, you have a Dark Age. The only thing left in this time of the Dark Ages that could be some sort of island of stability is a Catholic Church. And so the Catholic Church takes on the role of educator, of administrator, of even banks. The churches were able to send money to each other and this sort of thing. So in other words, the Catholic Church becomes the de facto leader throughout all of Europe in this time. So when we talk about the medieval ethical system or medieval ethics, we're talking about an ethics that is very much centered by Catholic theology and philosophy. And we cannot escape that. However, as we'll see, when we look at the likes of Augustine and Aquinas, it's not as if you have to be Catholic to appreciate their views. We can understand their ethical systems philosophically as well. For indeed, if we understand God as sort of an idea, or more in terms of an idea, then even if we can divorce, if you could, God from these things, from the ethical systems of Augustine and Aquinas, they still stand rationally as well. So whether we look at these through natural philosophy or whether we look at them through theology, nonetheless, either way, we still have ethical systems that we can comprehend. So the medieval world, as we get into it, is a world in which we'll see a lot of religious influence, and hopefully now you kind of appreciate the historical reason for it. And we don't need to be all, wrapped around the axle when we hear the word God, when we read Augustine and Aquinas, because we don't need necessarily to agree with the religious denominations in order to appreciate the reason behind the ethical systems that they espouse. And that is the medieval world.